Welcome to another live stream. I was about to say live chat because I've been having some issues with the chat, so that's on my mind. I hope everyone is doing well. I'm quickly turning the volume down on my phone so that we don't have spillover from because I always have the live up on there, so that and I didn't do it in time. So I hope everyone is doing well. Yeah, so another live. So this one is going to be, well, hopefully interesting. So there's a podcast episode that I've been meaning to listen to for quite some time. And I listened to like the first 10 minutes ages ago and then never got around to listening to the rest of it. And then I thought, well, if I commit to doing it on a live stream, then I'll actually get round to doing it, so we can listen to it together. So I'll let you know which podcast episode it is. Then I'm going to go over a few quick things before we actually get into things, and then we can get into it. So before we do anything, though, I will say hello to everyone in the chat. So hello, Louis. Did I say hello really weird then? You're right, Louis. Heartborn, Orange, and Kai as well. And Massilia as well. Welcome to the chat, everyone. There are 17 people watching, so if you haven't said hello in the chat already, please go ahead and do so. I know there are some of you out there that regularly watch but don't put in the chat, so this is your moment. Bovine Blue Stocking, Rotom, Tailgate, welcome to the chat, welcome to the stream. Yoda's back for more, or shall I say back for more, Yoda is. So cool. So yeah, so this is the podcast episode we're going to be listening to today. And I am in the way, so you can't see what the podcast is. The Overpopulation podcast. So yeah, but what we're going to do, so this podcast episode, I've got to say I don't regularly listen to the Overpopulation podcast. I can imagine the stuff they talk about overpopulation. I assume it's more around like sustainability and the conditions and resources, that we have access to. So yeah, I don't regularly listen to it, but Emil has did an episode with them 3 months ago now, and yeah, I wanted to listen to it because I think they get into a bit of population ethics, so it's relevant to antinatalism. Emil is, I don't think, an antinatalist, although they've written, yeah, I think I'm pretty sure. No, so they're not an antinatalist, but they've written some sort of essay on why they will not have kids. So I think they're like quite sympathetic, but just not all the way there. But they're very skeptical of this sort of long-termist, enthusiastic long-termist bringing, masturbating over the ideas of future generations coming into existence. So yeah, he's very skeptical of that. I think he's also quite skeptical of effective altruism in general. So yeah, I wanted to have a listen, and I thought it'd be cool if we listen together. So obviously you can see where I got the name of the live stream from. Highway to Hell: The Dystopian Fantasies of Tech Billionaires. So yeah, that's what, I don't think there's anything else I was going to say about Emil, apart from they also wrote the big book on human extinction. I will quickly say hello to a few more people in the chat. Snake Killer is in the chat. Anna, it's Sage, Kodak as well. And Anna says, hello guys, going to my first baby shower / gender reveal. It will be weird. Well, I hope it goes as well as it can do. I hope I mean, if you're going, you're going, so you might as well enjoy yourself. But yeah, it'll be interesting next, after you've been to it, next, live stream you're in or anything like that. Let us know, how it went. Did you have any conversations around antinatalism? I'm not saying you necessarily should, a baby shower is probably not the best place to bring it up. although it would be relevant, but whatever. Zuzah is in the chat. Cool. Okay, so there's a couple things that I quickly wanted to go over before we actually get into it. Ray is in the chat as well. So there's one thing that I forgot to talk about last live stream, which is very exciting and important, which is the keen-eyed among you may have seen on my community tab, or it's now called posts tab, I think, is there's an upcoming antinatalist panel. So I've written here, very soon I'll be joining other antinatalists on an exciting panel. The topic is how to define antinatalism. Now, the lineup for the panel is very exciting. So you've got myself, Amanda, who runs Exploring Antinatalism podcast, David Pearce, who is a sort of transhumanist philosopher. He also appeared in the Antinatalist Advocacy Conference last year. Matti Hairi, who is an antinatalist philosopher, he also appeared in the conference last year. Karima Kerma, who is a German antinatalist philosopher, does a lot of sort of like antinatalist archaeology as well. Super nice guy. I've met Karim in person. And then David Benatar as well, who obviously we don't have a picture of to include, but so David Benatar will also be there, and we'll all be discussing how to define antinatalism. And, you know, obviously maybe not all of us are going to come at it from different angles, but there's going to be a spectrum of views. So it'll be interesting to go over that, hash that out. And if you want to be involved or have a chance to be involved in some way, there is a link in the post on my channel where actually that's from the edited end. So yeah, basically the form, you can put in your thoughts on how to define antinatalism, and then there's a chance that we will read that out at some point. So yeah, I think that's everything for this update. So the next thing I wanted to quickly mention before we get into the bulk of the live stream is I have forgotten to advertise during the stream. So each stream I should mention this. So I created I actually am not wearing one now, so this isn't one of them. But I actually probably should have. But yeah, I'm not wearing one now. But yes, I have them. Well, I don't have all of them because I've already sold some. But so I did a limited edition print run of these Antinatalist Social Club t-shirts. They are, I know obviously there are people all around the world, but in pounds they are £20. Great British pounds, sterling. So yeah, if you would like to get your hands on one of these, then I will post a link in the chat now. Let me get the link quickly and I'll post it in the chat. So I should have had the link prepared already. Extremely unprofessional. Cool. So let's go back to the live. Boom. So I cannot multitask. Fuck me. Okay. All right. Nice. So I've put that in the chat. So if anyone would like to get their hands on one of these t-shirts, then that is now in the chat. They should also be in the description of all my videos going forward. At least I haven't gone back because I think I'm coming up to like 300 videos now. Actually, I might have, no, I'm pretty sure I am coming up to 300 videos. So I haven't gone all the way back. So they're not in every video, but all the recent ones and every one going forward, the link will be in the description. There's a post on my post tab as well. but the link is in the chat as well. So if you'd like to get your hands on one of those, then go in there. If this run is successful, then I will do like more designs in the future, and maybe we can do like votes on the community tab on like which designs to do, and then you can buy those. But yeah, now I've been through the process once of figuring out like how to do all of these, get a print done. I'm more like, I know how to do it. So, so then we can then we can do more designs, and it's easier because I've been through the process. There is a bunch of sizes. All of the sizes are still available, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, you can go through there and get your hands on a t-shirt, and then I will be sending them out myself as and when they come in. And I actually have like a few stickers to hand that I only have a few left though, so the next few people to order t-shirts, I can put them in an extra free sticker, but that will only be the next few ones because I don't have many left of those. That wasn't planned, I just happened to have some stickers. Cool. Okay, so right, that is that. Now let me just get myself sorted, and we will can people just let me know in the chat, is anyone experiencing issues like lagging? Because again, I'm not seeing any issues, but I'm getting a warning sign from YouTube saying that there's some issues. But to be honest, sometimes YouTube just lies to me. I don't know what's going on. Cool. Okay, nice one. Right, I think that is everything, so we can get into it. Only final thing to say is, if you would like to send in a donation, support, super chat, tip through Streamlabs, then the link is in the pinned comment. Pinned chat, sorry. Cool. Okay. So actually, one final thing to say is, so what we're going to be doing is we are going to be listening to this podcast episode, but to make it slightly more interesting, only slightly though, because playing this, it's just a still image. So you'll literally just be looking at a still image with like me sat there. That's not going to be fun. So what I've done is I've downloaded the podcast episode and put it to some footage of floating through space. So there's going to be a bit of a moving image. Cool. Okay, I think that is everything. So now let me get it up, which is what he said. Cool. Okay, nice. If everyone is ready, we will get into it. So this is the Overpopulation podcast episode with Emil Torres.
In this episode of the Overpopulation podcast, we'll be talking...
And I also boosted the volume, so I'm hoping that the volume will be okay for people.
...with philosopher and historian Dr. Emil Torres about some of the more twisted visions of ecologically blind tech billionaires and their dreams of defying nature, transcending humanity, and colonizing the universe.
Welcome to the Overpopulation podcast, where we tirelessly make ecological overshoot and overpopulation common knowledge. That's the first step in right-sizing the scale of our human footprint so that it is in balance with life on Earth, enabling all species to thrive. I'm Nandita Bajaj, co-host of the podcast and executive director of Population Balance.
I'm Alan Ware, co-host of the podcast and researcher with Population Balance, the first and only nonprofit organization globally that draws the connections between pronatalism, human supremacy, and ecological overshoot, and offers solutions to address their combined impacts on the people, planet, and animals. And now on to today's guest. Emil P. Torres is a philosopher and historian whose work focuses on existential threats to civilization and humanity. They have published on a wide range of topics, including machine, superintelligence, emerging technologies, and religious eschatology, as well as the history and ethics of human extinction. Emil's work has appeared in various academic journals such as Futures and Bioethics, and in popular media outlets such as The Washington Post, Big Think, Current Affairs, and many others. Their most recent book is Human Extinction, A History of the Science and Ethics of Annihilation.
Well, Emil, we have been following your work with great interest for a while and are so impressed with the breadth and depth of both your knowledge and your lived experience in the fields of human existential risk, long-termism, effective altruism, and so many other important philosophical issues of our time. We have listened to hours of your interviews and lectures and are excited that we get to chat with you in real time today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Amazing. And though your philosophical study is so wide-ranging, given the limited time that we have with you today, we'd like to focus today on your analysis of the effective altruism and long-termism movements. Effective altruism, as you've noted, comes with a large degree of utilitarianism, which is an ethical theory that posits the best action is the one that maximizes utility and is often simplified as that action that produces the greatest well-being for the greatest number of people. And that sounds reasonable in theory, but as we'll discuss today, over the past several years, you've expressed deep concerns about effective altruists' approach to doing good in the world. So let's start with a brief description of effective altruism and look at some of its history. What would you describe as the main beliefs of the effective altruism, or EA, community, and the origins of this approach?
Yeah, great question. So effective altruism, the key idea is that we should use the tools of science and reason to figure out the best ways to do the most.
I know he's going to do a very quick intro on effective altruism, but just for anyone who doesn't know what effective altruism is, so it's a sort of like a set of ideas and also a community that uses that set of ideas. And it's based around basically trying to do good, make the world a better place in an effective way. So that's sort of like a very brief tagline, just to give you some context in case you've never heard of it before Emil goes into more of an in-depth one.
Most good in the world. And so that sounds quite nice and compelling at first, until you sort of look at the details. And some of the metrics that they use to figure out the most effective interventions to increase the good, increase value in the world, turn out to be somewhat ableist. Some of those have been abandoned over time. But also another example of an effective altruism idea that sort of looks appealing to at least some people at first glance, but in practice has had some rather negative consequences, is their idea of earning to give. So this ties into a critique of EA that they are insufficiently attentive to the possibility of systemic change. So the idea is very individualistic. You as an individual are embedded in this system, our system being capitalism, neoliberalism, and so on. Then the question is, within this system, how can you personally do the most good? And so earning to give is an answer to that question. And it says that, imagine a scenario where you could go and work for an environmental nonprofit. And maybe you get paid $50,000 a year or something, and you have some kind of modest impact on the ability of that nonprofit to push through climate mitigation legislation and so on. Alternatively, you could go get a job for a petrochemical company or some company on Wall Street, maybe make $1 million a year. And then if you take that money and you donate it to that environmental nonprofit, let's just say they can hire 10 people. So rather than you going to work for them, they get an extra employee, you pay them all this extra money that you're making on Wall Street, and then they hire 10 extra people. And so ultimately you've done more good. One of the criticisms of this is that working for petrochemical companies or companies on Wall Street, which the co-founder of EA, William Caskell, himself describes as quote unquote immoral organizations. One of the problems with working for immoral organizations is that you compromise your moral integrity. But this is where the utilitarian kind of element of EA comes into play, where within utilitarianism, moral integrity only matters as a means. It only matters instrumentally, because for utilitarians, the only thing that's
and you've kind of got, I know it's I mean, I haven't been keeping up to date with it, so I know it's still sort of somewhat ongoing, but I don't know where they've got to with it. But you've got a kind of example of this with the case of Sam Bankman-Fried and bloody hell, what was the FTX? Am I getting the name wrong? It was FTX, wasn't it? Yeah, I think so. I just had a complete blank on that. But yeah, so you have like that as a sort of recent big example.
Important, ethically speaking, are the consequences. So there's nothing intrinsically bad about working for an immoral organization. There's nothing intrinsically bad about murder or lying or fraud.
Yeah.
Right? It all depends on the consequences. One of the great success stories of the earn to give idea was Sam Bankman-Fried. Right? So he sat down in 2012 with Will
All right, so here we go.
MacAskill, and MacAskill told him about EA and about this idea of earn to give. Bankman-Fried he either just graduated or was about to graduate from MIT. And he was, I believe, thinking of working for like an animal rights organization. And MacAskill convinced him to go work on Wall Street. So he went and did that with a bunch of other EAs like Matthew Wage. And in fact, Bankman-Fried's brother, Gabriel, also worked on Wall Street for the same company, James Street Capital. And so after several years at James Street Capital, Bankman-Fried decided to, as one journalist put it, get filthy rich for charity's sake by going into crypto. And obviously he was very successful, at least for a little while, on paper. So yeah, it's sort of funny to think about Bankman-Fried's biography, because if he hadn't met Will MacAskill, hadn't been introduced to the ideas of EA, he probably never would have gone into crypto. And he would have been just like an unusual, kind of nerdy, maybe interesting guy working at some nonprofit, rather than an individual in federal prison who's responsible for maybe the biggest case of U.S. fraud in history.
Right.
So the earn to give idea is, I think, an example of how trying to maximize the good in this kind of utilitarian manner can lead to some really bad consequences, ironically enough. So that's sort of EA. The EA movement really goes back to around 2009. So this is when the first EA organization was founded, Giving What We Can, sort of co-founded by Toby Ord and Will MacAskill, both at the University of Oxford.
Well, thank you. And I became aware of the effective altruism movement after reading a book by Peter Singer about 10 years ago.
He mentioned Will MacAskill there. So one of the books that's relevant to this discussion, but also this idea of long-termism. I think they're probably going to get onto long-termism specifically in a minute. But Will MacAskill wrote a book called What We Owe the Future, where if you want an example of someone like salivating over the idea of future generations coming into existence and like, this is going to be amazing, it's going to be blissful, there's going to be trillions of people, and they're all going to be having orgasms, then that is the book for you. He has a whole chapter on, I think it's just one chapter, but he has a whole section on population ethics, and antinatalism is one line, I think, or two lines, which is like astounding. I can remember talking to one of my friends about it at the time when I first read the book. The fact that like if he's putting forward like a set of ideas, right, or an ideology or something that we should put significant resources into, and he didn't even in any meaningful way entertain the main set of ideas opposed to what he's advocating for, which is pretty, I mean, yeah, I'd say that was a bit of a misfire, to say the least. But yeah, so I mean, I've got the book up there, but I'm not going to get it down. But it's called What We Owe the Future. It's like, if you're an antinatalist and you want to expose yourself to the opposite point of view of how you probably think, well, it's not totally opposite actually, but certain element, the enthusiastic nature of wanting future generations to come into existence, that is obviously the complete opposite. So yeah, and it's a very accessible book. It's still interesting. Like, there's a bunch of things he touches on, which is very interesting. So yeah, if people want to, they can check it out.
The most good you can do. And as an animal rights advocate, I was trying to figure out, how do I be the most effective person I can for the animals? And as I was reading the book, there were a lot of things that just did not sit right with me. And at the time, I didn't know the difference between consequentialism or deontological kind of philosophical worldviews. I just thought, how could someone be asking you to compromise your own moral integrity and work in a field that clearly we have evidence, is creating all sorts of exploitation of people and non-human beings to make a lot of money so that then you can give that money to whatever charity. And some of the things that you brought up in terms of the blind spots of the movement is they can define what good means, and they can define what effective is. And they've taken it upon themselves to decide how to combine those two to have the most positive impact. And to your point, it's so individualistic. It kind of buys into that same neoliberal model, is that you are the captain of your own life. Not only that, but you can single-handedly have this incredible impact by giving through philanthropy without ever stopping to challenge any of the power hierarchies, any of the systems currently in place that have allowed them to become that rich, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So consistent with that, some EAs have described people like Bill Gates as the greatest philanthropists in human history. And they seem to be completely unaware that the empires of a lot of these billionaires, tech billionaires, are built on exploitation. And I think in general, a lot of EAs, maybe also dovetailing with their consequentialist utilitarian tendencies, tend to focus entirely on the outcomes of certain interventions without asking questions about the causes of the situation in the first place. So maybe it's precisely the system that enabled Bill Gates to make billions and billions of dollars. That system may be responsible, maybe in large part, for the plight of people around the world who are struggling.
And I've just remembered, actually, I did a video a while ago called, I'm pretty sure it's called The Life You Can Spare, which is, so one of the sort of, so I think Peter Singer's already been mentioned. So one of the sort of foundational people in effective altruism is Peter Singer, and he wrote a book called The Life You Can Save, where he lays out like a very famous thought experiment about a child in a pond. Anyway, so yeah, I made a video which was sort of like an antinatalist take on that. So I think that, yeah, that video is relevant to this on my channel. And another video that's relevant to this is that I was at an event watching Will McCaskill speak and got to ask him a question. I can't remember if it was just me or if also John was there. But either way, that is also, if you type in like Lawrence Anton, Will McCaskill, then that video will come up. And then also on the Antinatalist Advocacy channel, there are 2 podcast episodes where John and I respond to both Peter Singer and Will McCaskill on sort of effective altruism, population ethics type stuff. So you can check those out as well. I will try and remember to put all those links in the description once the stream is done.
Toby Ord published a book in 2020, which was discussing a central idea within EA and especially long-termism, namely existential risk. And so these are threats that could, if they were to be actualized, erase what Toby Ord himself refers to as our vast inglorious future in the universe as we spread into space, become digital, and ultimately maximize value.
Yeah, this whole narrative of these people, of this like vast and glorious future, is, I just find it so cringy. Like, it's just like completely opposite to antinatalism, and I just see it as so naive. Like the more people, or even sentient AI maybe in the future, often these people talk about, that you bring into existence, the higher the stakes get. Like, imagine if something were to go wrong on a civilizational level, there would be so many more victims to fall afoul of that. I mean, there's billions of people now, but imagine if there were like trillions of people. Imagine like the levels of suffering that would go on. I mean, we don't even know what the lives of those people would look like, really, actually, because to get to the point where we'd have trillions of people, it would be so far in the future that their lives would be like very different to ours. But yeah, it's like if our technological capacity increases, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's just going to be for the positive, right? Like, it could be that those future people could reach higher highs than us in terms of an experience of well-being. But if the magnitude is increased in the positive, it could also be increased in the negative. We don't know what the future holds, right? Like, it's not guaranteed it's all going to go well. You may just increase the stakes and then it all collapses. Whereas if we just ceased procreating, there were more people coming into existence, there would be no one around to be wronged by that, be deprived in any way. That just seems just on like trying to avoid like S risks, like suffering risks. The longer we perpetuate humanity and the larger we grow it, it seems like, and the more technology we develop, because some of those technologies may be safeguards, but some of them also may be increasing the risk that they may be used for bad, or they may malfunction and go bad. The further we grow humanity, both in scale and in time, it seems like the higher the chances that an S risk, which is a risk of like intense suffering on the scale we've never seen before, would emerge. So like just from that perspective, in my eyes, it's just like, given that if we didn't procreate and there was no one any longer here, there would be no one around to be deprived of that. Why would we even take the risk?
And the reason I mention this is throughout the something like 300 pages of the book, as I recall, there isn't a single mention of capitalism. So I mean, some could argue quite compellingly that capitalism is an underlying sort of fundamental driver of the climate crisis, which, according to a recent study, threatens to kill 1 billion people this century. 1 billion people will die, according to this study, from direct effects of climate change. And capitalism also is very much at the heart of the current race to build AGI, artificial general intelligence. So that's the explicit goal of companies like OpenAI and DeepMind, Anthropic, xAI, recently founded by Elon Musk. So AGI is supposed to be this system that is at least at the same level of intellectual capability as human beings. So I think there are two main phenomena that are fueling this race to build AGI. One is these sort of utopian ideologies. Long-termism would be a part of that group, but also capitalism. Microsoft and Google, Amazon, and so on, they're investing billions of dollars in these companies in hopes of making a massive profit. And Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, himself said during an interview with, I believe, the CEO of Airbnb, that the likely outcome of AGI will be...
That's so strange that Sam Altman did an interview with the CEO of Airbnb.
Human annihilation. But, he adds, at least there will be some really cool AI companies in the meantime.
Wow.
And so all of this is to say that capitalism is also driving this race to build what the CEOs themselves of these AI companies describe as an extremely dangerous technology. Capitalism is behind climate change and so on. Capitalism has a big part to play in global poverty. And yet EAs have said virtually nothing about capitalism and its relation to this proliferation of global catastrophic risks that are completely unprecedented this century.
And we've been touching on long-termism, a little bit here and there, but it'd be great to go deeper into it. So, when you first hear the word long-termism, it kind of brings to mind this certain ethical value that we should be putting on the lives of future generations.
So this is getting more into the sort of like the bulk of what the anti-natalist would have a concern about, right? So get ready to cringe, everyone.
Kind of like the seventh generation principle based on the ancient Haudenosaunee philosophy that the decisions we make today should result in a sustainable world for 7 generations into the future, right? And I would say that sadly, we don't even seem to be doing that at all within our current paradigm structure. But this long-termism view that's kind of emerged out of this transhumanism view is quite different and, as you've alluded to, quite perverse. And you've described some of the basic beliefs of long-termists who are perpetuating this kind of ideology.
I might have oh, here we go.
We bring children in this world and we raise them
to be warriors against evil. Thank you so much for the support, the donation. I'm going to play it again just so in case people missed it, but I will read it out as well.
To be warriors against evil.
So, I wanted to say, thank you for the support. Thank you so much. and the message is, did you know that Lenin spoke against antinatalism? There is nothing, and then this is a quote, there is nothing to be done if only there were fewer children to suffer our torments and hard toil, our poverty and our humiliation. Such is the cry of the petty bourgeois. Commies worship him. That's interesting. So there is nothing to be done if only there were fewer children to suffer our torments and hard toil, our poverty and our humiliation. Such is the cry of the petty bourgeois. I'm not sure I understand the point he's making there. I might just be being an idiot. So what I'll have to do is I'll have to look that up afterwards and read it again while I'm not on stream, and see the context that he was saying it in, because then maybe I'll understand it more if it's in the context. But yeah, if you're saying he's speaking against antinatalism, then I can kind of understand what he's saying there, but that's interesting. I didn't even know that he would have commented on something like that. Thank you so much for the support. There was something else I was going to say before we keep going. Oh yeah, that was it. I just need to move something around. So let me just move this over here. And then we can go back to here.
And you've named some of the prominent thinkers, McCaskill being one of them, but let's start at the basics of long-termism a little bit. What are the tenets of long-termism? And who are, other than McCaskill, some of the thinkers in the movement?
Yeah, so I think it might be useful to start off by distinguishing between long-term thinking and long-termism. So I am a huge fan of long-term thinking and believe that we need a whole lot more of it in the world, especially given the fact that, climate change will affect Earth for another roughly 10,000 years. So that's a longer period of time than civilization has existed so far. Long-termism goes way beyond long-term thinking. And so part of the claim about how big the future could be is a claim about how big the future should be. And I think this is where long-termism sort of diverges with a lot of people's intuitions about what it means to care about the long-term future, and also diverges with this sort of seventh generation idea. So here's the claim. If there is a future possible life that would be better than miserable, so it would contain like a net positive amount of value. To simplify just a tiny little bit, but not much. If it would contain a net positive amount of value, then if it could exist, then it should exist, right? So could exist implies should exist.
Yeah. So now he's getting into long-termism. So this is the bit that like Will McCaskill talks about in his book, like the sort of cringe bit. So basically what Emil is going over there is basically saying, so there's a differentiation between long-term thinking and long-termism. So I've sort of used the terms before, enthusiastic long-termism and reluctant long-termism. So I'll explain the difference there, and it's kind of capturing the same distinction as what Emil is talking about. So long-termism, as it's seen and advocated for by many effective altruists, is what I would call enthusiastic long-termism, in that what Emil is saying is that the future should be very big in terms of scale and like technological progress. So we actively want many future generations to come into existence. We want many people to come into existence. Maybe, we want trillions of future humans, because we have this idea that creating a new human who will have a net positive life is a good thing, right? So this is sort of enthusiastic long-termism, in that we should be bringing about future generations. And then, okay, so there's that element. And then the other element of enthusiastic long-termism is that we should put a significant weight on the interests of those future generations that will come into existence or should come into existence, because the things that we do now could or very likely will significantly impact them in the long run. And for any effort we make now to improve the lives of those who currently exist could actually have a much greater impact if we're just able to nudge the dial in a slightly positive direction for future generations, because it will compound over time. So those are kind of the two aspects of enthusiastic long-termism. Reluctant long-termism, which I would probably say I subscribe to, is it takes, well, I don't know if I would subscribe to it, but I can very much more understand it. So what reluctant long-termism says is we like the idea of, like, if there are going to be future generations, then we should obviously take their interests into account, because their interests will exist at some point in the future. And if we can do things now that will massively benefit them in the future when they do exist, then we can allocate some resources to doing that, right? Although I personally believe we shouldn't just obviously like throw in the towel on people who exist now. Although, to be charitable, that's not what long-termists are saying. They're not saying that we should throw in the towel on current people. But anyway, so yeah, but where... So I can... What is that noise? Sorry, there's a... I don't know if you can hear that through the microphone, but there's a very strange noise going on somewhere. And I can't tell where it is. I don't know if it's an issue. It stopped, so I guess it's not an issue. That was bizarre. So, yeah, but with reluctant long-termism, it's saying, yeah, so that stuff sounds like good, considering future individuals, all this sort of stuff. The thing that reluctant long-termism isn't on board with, though, is this idea that we want those future generations to exist. Like, reluctant long-termism, as I define it, is saying it's more of an antinatalist take of, like, we shouldn't bring those future generations into existence, or, we're not actively trying to bring it about. But if they do come into existence, or they are going to come into existence, then obviously we should take their interests, even in the long term, into consideration. So, and I think that's what Emil is referring to as long-term thinking rather than long-termism, because long-termism really has this like component of, like, just salivating over this idea of future generations coming into existence, like it's your like sexual fetish or some shit. Very bizarre to me. Anyway, so let's go back. So let's just quickly say hello to any new people in the chat. So Jimmy M Experience is in the chat. Linda is in the chat. Etruska, the Antinatal Lope, Flesh Eating, something. I can't read that all out. Who else is in the chat? Tailgate Activism. Maybe I already said you. I can't remember from before. Olawali Blue Vegan is in the chat. Chill is in the chat. Is there anyone else? I'm not seeing anyone else. Haji is in the chat, and Holger is in the chat. And Holger says, greetings from Sweden. Greetings from Sweden. I lived in Uppsala for a time. So yeah, whereabouts in Sweden are you, Holger?
In this world, and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
We have another donation. Thank you so much for the support. Really appreciate it. It really does help. And let's quickly have another go so people can read it.
World, and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
Okay, so it's sharing the link for that quote from Lenin, saying he basically thinks that people who complain about the human condition are just not interested in overthrowing capitalism and create a communist paradise on Earth. Right, that's interesting. Okay, yeah, I'll look into that when the stream is finished. Yeah, because that could be interesting. Maybe if there's enough stuff, I could maybe sort of yeah, if there's a video in the future that I make that's sort of relevant to, I could maybe fit it in. But yeah, we'll see. But thank you so much for the donation and the support. Holger says they're in Lund. Yeah, I never went to Lund when I was in Sweden. Welcome to the chat, Dylan, as well. But I think Lund was the other, because I went to Sweden on an exchange program, and Uppsala was an option, and then I think Lund was the other option. But it might have been Malmo as well. I can't remember. Yeah, it looks like there's a few Swedes in the chat, because I think Linda and Etruska were speaking together in Swedish as well. So how many Swedes are there in the chat? Are there 3 Swedes or are there more? I feel like there's 50 people watching. Sweden has big representation compared to its population on the global scale. Swedish legends.
On the condition that the life will have a net positive amount of value. So I think this idea is very counterintuitive, and there's 2 reasons that long-termists would give for this. One is that there's this very strange and highly controversial idea within philosophy, which is that there are kind of 2 basic ways to benefit someone. Ordinary benefits, which is just what would come to mind, like holding the door for somebody or giving somebody who is unhoused, $100 or something like that. That's a benefit in an ordinary sense. But then there are these existential benefits. So another way to benefit someone is that if they will have a half-decent life, bringing them into existence in the first place benefits them. So then there's a question of like, well, you can imagine yourself in a situation where like, okay, I have...
That's bizarre to me. It's like, how is creating someone a benefit to that individual? Like the only thing I can see people pointing to is that like, oh, they're going to have meaning, or they're going to have like well-being or happiness and fulfillment in their life. But the only reason they need those things is because you created it in them in the first place. It would be, and it's like, once they exist, if they're not able to secure those things, and let's be honest, in the world, it's not guaranteed that they will secure those things, they're going to be deprived. So you've just created a deprivation that now needs to be sort of satiated from nothing. I just don't see how you can see that as a positive thing. This would be like creating hunger in someone merely to then provide them with the food they need and then pat yourself on the back and say you've done a good thing. It's like, what? And then like an additional, and I think this is what Emil is going to go on to now, an additional thing on top of that is that you've then just used resources to attend to the deprivations you've created in that person that could have been used to attend to the deprivations in existing people. So it's like, imagine I have a bottle of water, right? And I have 5 people in front of me who are thirsty. And I could hand that bottle of water to any 5 of them. That would be a benefit to that individual person, right? But instead of doing that, and that would be a good thing to do, but instead of doing that, I'm going to create a 6th person and give them the water bottle and then claim that I have like then done something good because I've given someone some water. What are you talking about, you madman? Like, you've just you had resources that you could have done something good with, and then you've created someone who didn't need to exist with the same problem as those 5 existing people, and just basically wasted your resource, wasted your capacity in that instance to do good in the world by spunking it on a person who didn't even need to exist, didn't exist to need that water, to want that water, needed any benefit in any way. So bizarre to me. Abdallah is in the chat. And YouTube user is in the chat. Very original name. Cool.
2 choices. I can benefit someone by giving them, this person who already exists, $100, or I could benefit somebody by not giving them $100, but instead having a child, or doing something that would bring someone into the world. And maybe the second option might be better in some circumstance. So that's pretty counterintuitive, I think, to most people, but that's part of the claim. And the other claim really has to do with utilitarianism, because our sole moral obligation, according to utilitarianism, is to maximize the total amount of value that exists in the universe as a whole. So then there are 2 ways to maximize the total amount of value. One is you could say, like, okay, within a population of people, like the population of individuals who currently exist, I'm going to increase their well-being, make them happier, whatever that requires, giving them money or better living circumstances and so on. Another option is just to create new people.
Right.
Insofar as those...
Yeah, it's such a Ponzi scheme. So I'm actually working on a video on this at the moment, sort of putting together... Not that, obviously, I'm not the first person to do this, but I'm trying to like pull information together in one sort of succinct place. Putting a video together on like, there's this dictum or like phrase of make people happy, not happy people, and it's called Narvison's dictum, and it's basically the idea of like, creating a happy life is actually not a positive thing to do. It's not negative. If you're just talking about the positive side, it's just like, it's a neutral thing. Whereas making people who already exist happier than they otherwise would have been, that is a positive thing to do. And especially when you introduce the whole thing of like, you've got limited resources, you need to allocate them somehow to do good, then then it obviously becomes like a much bigger, more serious issue, more applicable to real life. But yeah, this idea of like, you can do good in the world by simply creating new people is to me, it's just like baseless, extremely counterintuitive, doesn't make any sense. And yeah, almost, I can see why Emil likens it to like capitalism, because it's like having, I think I used this analogy on like in my last live stream of like, it's like having a bank account and all you're interested in is seeing the numbers go up, like accruing more and more money. But the money is just sat there and it's not useful to anyone. Like, the money is not valuable in and of itself. It's valuable to someone who can use it. And so simply creating more people to experience well-being, is not a positive. It's creating well-being to serve people is the positive thing, rather than creating people to serve well-being. Very bizarre to me. But Omar's in the chat. Welcome, Omar. I think there's no one else new that I could see. Let's continue.
People are going to be quote unquote happy, meaning they don't have miserable lives. Then that's a second way. So utilitarianism says you should do both. And consequently, this is why long-termists are so obsessed with calculating how many future people there could be. Because if there could be an enormous number of future people compared to current day people, then maybe the best way to maximize the total amount of good is to kind of like not worry about current day people and focus on how your actions today are going to ensure the realization of these future people. And these ideas that I'm referencing were ideas that a philosopher named Nick Bostrom had articulated in the early 2000s, drawing from modern cosmology, basically that Earth will remain habitable for a really long period of time. Right, so we have about another billion years. Life has been around for 3.8 billion years. We have another billion years to go. And our species has been around for 300,000 years. So that's a huge future. And the first person to calculate how many people could exist in the future, I think, was Carl Sagan back in 1983. He said if we survive for another 10 million years, there could be 500 trillion people. So that's just like an enormous number of future people. By comparison, there have been about 117 billion humans who have existed so far. So a much, much larger number of future people than past or present people. But basically, Bostrom pointed out that what if we spread beyond Earth? Then there could be a much, much greater number than 500 trillion. And so he calculated that if we spread into space and become digital beings, living in computer simulations, so computer simulations could house a much larger population than if we just live on terraformed exoplanets, so other planets out there that we make like Earth. And he estimated that within the universe as a whole, there could be 10 to the 58 people. So that's a 1 followed by 58 zeros. Again, much, much larger than 117 billion, much larger than 500 trillion. So all of that is to say, if you combine those claims about how big the future could be with the effective altruist imperative to do the most good, you get the following line of reasoning. If your goal is to positively influence the greatest number of people, and if by far most people who could exist will exist in the far future, then maybe what you should be doing as a good rational altruist is focusing on the very far future, not on...
Yeah, it's crazy because it can distract the efforts and resources of like very studious, hardworking, decent people. It can distract them to trying to do good things for people who don't need to exist. Obviously, there's a separate question of like people who will exist, but like if they're supporting the idea that future people should exist, and we should be bringing about like trillions and trillions of them, it's like, why put all that effort into creating people who simply don't need to exist? They are not some sort of ghost fetus out there trying to get into existence. They don't exist on any level. And you could be putting your time and energy into helping people, or, you know, other animals as well, sentient beings who already exist and who will exist regardless of your efforts. And it's just like, oh my Lord, I mean, this idea of enthusiastic long-termism has caught on with certain people in effective altruist circles. And I just hope it doesn't like draw too many resources towards it, because like, yeah, it's just like these future individuals just simply don't need to exist. There's not going to be any harm done by them not coming into existence. And the idea that people would put effort that they could put into helping people who already exist, tangible people with interests and desires and needs, and divert those resources to helping to try and bring about or benefit individuals who don't need to exist. Is bizarre. The only caveat I would obviously add, and I've already added it, is like, obviously there's future beings who will exist, that obviously we should take into account.
The present. And it's by virtue of how huge the future could be if we colonize space, become digital beings, and so on, that all contemporary problems that do not threaten the realization of this huge future just fade into basically nothingness. So this is the idea of long-termism, which emerged out of the EA movement. And there's a great tension between this cause area within EA of long-termism and the initial cause area of alleviating global poverty. Because alleviating global poverty, like, yes, that's going to help. I think there's 1.3 billion estimated in multidimensional poverty. So yes, that is a huge number in absolute terms, but in relative terms, that is just a tiny fraction of the total number of people who could exist if you take this grand cosmic view across not just space, but across time into the future. And that is where I think it's just very...
Yeah, the more I like listen to people and, discussing like different ideas and different worldviews and stuff, and think about it, like the more, I don't want to call them all dangerous, but maybe just like distracting and maybe to some extent dangerous these like grand narratives are, because they encourage this idea of pursuing like some sort of utopia that's defined by that grand narrative. Even an antinatalist one, like we don't get out of this, like this antinatalist grand narrative of like, human extinction and, a universe with no life or anything. Sure, obviously it's interesting to discuss these things. I've discussed these things, I'm not like a non-guilty party here. But like these grand narratives like this end state orientated sort of grand narrative thinking, like it's very alluring, it's very interesting, but it just, it's just so far removed from the reality we're in now. And obviously you need to have an idea of like what you eventually want to see the world look like, because you need to have something to aim towards. But I feel like we just need to be so much more grounded in reality and the here and now and like the near-term future, that we can be more sort of realistic about making predictions about and operate in that sort of arena rather than these grand narratives. Because they can be like very dangerous. They can lead you to thinking in utopian like terms, and when you're trying to achieve a utopia, it can make you disregard the well-being or the interests of like very real individuals now. And look, I will probably slip into like grand narrative thinking again, and I will have done in the past. But I think like it's something we should try and steer away from, at least in my current thinking, because it just seems like a bit of a distraction, and it's just so far removed from what any of us can impact. Like, there are 53 people watching now plus me, so 54. So us as 54 people actually have like the capacity to make the world a better place in tangible ways, right? If we all use our skills in ways that, use the skills we have, do the things we're good at to make the world a better place, and not bring any more sentient beings into it. Obviously help sentient beings that are here now. Fuck, it's gone down to 52, so there's only 53 of us. Then like there's so much more stuff we could do than if we all like sat around online discussing and like philosophically musing about, which is fun. Look, and it's fine to like do that as well, to some extent. I'm not advocating for like a complete cessation of it, but if that preoccupies like a majority or a significant amount of our time, it can be very interesting, but I feel like it can also become like, a bit of a, what's it called? Opportunity cost as well. But yeah, I don't know exactly what the ratio is, like I don't know what the balance is, because obviously I enjoy doing it. There will be many people watching that enjoy doing it. And so it can be part of like our recreational time as well, which is obviously important to still have. But anyway, let's continue.
Counterintuitive, and like I mentioned before, it diverges with these other notions of like the seventh generation, which generally sort of presupposes the existence of future people, while also acknowledging that we can't really anticipate what the far future is going to look like, or what people in the far future are going to want. So the seventh generation, one thing that's really nice is that renews every generation, right? So every generation is thinking about 7 generations ahead, and you have this sort of chain, this link that extends into the future. Whereas the long-termists sort of have this vision about what ought to be in millions or billions or trillions of years from now. So there's a big tension between those two views. And so that's the history of EA and how long-termism emerged out of it.
Yeah, I think that techno-optimist view that they have of an assumption that history and the future are fairly linear and will play out in a fairly orderly, rational type of process. Meanwhile, their ignorance of the social inequalities, potential revolutions brewing below them, the ecological damage potentially leading to collapse. They become blind to the non-linearity possibility of just collapse. The whole system
Yeah, that's very true. Like, it's easy to look back at history and apply sort of a grand narrative of progress and stuff to it. And in some ways, obviously, we have progressed, depending on how you define progress. But it's very easy to focus on specific data points or follow a specific civilization or something like that and fit it into your narrative. But history is littered with civilizations that have come and gone and things that have been very unexpected, conflicts arising that weren't expected, new technologies that come around that cause great discord, and it's like, I guess, obviously past performance isn't a guarantee of future return, but if we're looking at history and how peppered it is with unexpected things, and even the slightest thing, like a mere coincidence can change the course of history. I mean, one example, which wouldn't have been, I can't say it wouldn't have been, but I doubt it would have been on the radar of any sort of like long-termist or in their like actual thinking about, how they should plan and stuff. But maybe I'm wrong on that. But just take the attempted assassination of Trump the other day, right? Or the other week. Like, the course of history could have potentially completely changed if one man, Trump, had been looking a slightly different direction. Like, if he'd actually been assassinated, then we could be in a very different world now. America would be in a very different world. Obviously, America sneezes, the world catches a cold. So it's like, just the slight turn of a head could have completely changed history. So that sort of stuff, right? Those small minutiae of, a very small, I think it's called the butterfly effect, right? Like the flap of a butterfly's wings can eventually lead to a hurricane. So it's like Trump turning his head slightly was the flap of a butterfly's wings. And that had like profound implications going forward. So it's like there's going to be so much more stuff that has happened like that in history, and there will be so much more stuff going forward, and those things just aren't captured in this grand narrative thinking of the future will be rational and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, it's an interesting point that guy made. Anyway, let's continue.
Is feeding them through Earn to Give, where they're going on Wall Street or Silicon Valley, and they're learning a lot about mergers and acquisitions and algorithms and thinking that they know more than the NGOs themselves, but they really just have the power. They have the money power. And that gives them the right to set the table on that and to be blind to these kind of churning collapses underneath their linear view that very much threaten a return to a more cyclical view of history, of human history, that isn't onward and upward. That artificial intelligence itself could be, a Great Depression, a stock market collapse could really suck a lot of the capital out of tech. The Magnificent Seven on the stock market right now could evaporate overnight. And so there is an assumption that money will just keep flowing. Cultural power will just keep flowing. And no doubt AGI is doing a lot. It is quite powerful. But underneath them is a biophysical substrate of energy and materials that reality is not all information, as a lot of them seem to think we can live entirely in a world of ideas and concepts, and not appreciating that meanwhile the biophysical substrate that supports all of that is eroding and in danger of collapse. And it just feels like a real form of blindness, ecological, material, energy blindness, and hubris and arrogance that you can maintain for quite a while because you are the money power, you are the cultural power. But at some point, a lot of that can be pulled from under you, and which I suppose any power is often blind to its own weaknesses.
Yeah, I think that's right. The linear view of history is very prominent. I mean, I maybe would describe this as a component of a kind of colonialist mindset, which I think is really influential, although not explicitly recognized as such, at least not normally, within the general EA community. But definitely this linear view of history. We started in this quote unquote primitive state of hunting and gathering, and then we advanced to an agricultural state, and then we advanced further through industrialization and so on. And one of the valuable contributions that the co-authored book, The Dawn of Everything, makes is calling into question this sort of linear view, saying, actually, there's some people that experimented with agriculture and then decided agriculture is actually much worse. It's a much worse life. What the EAs and long-termists do is then just extend this very one-dimensional, I would describe sort of impoverished.
I've never come across that book, The Dawn of Everything. I also don't entirely know what he means by the linear mindset being colonial. The Dawn of Everything. I definitely agree it's misguided, but I've never heard of this. I don't quite get what they mean by colonial. If anyone understands, please let me know. Cool. So I found this book, The Dawn of Everything. Where is the blurb? Here is the blurb. So let me just bring this over. Boom. I'll read it out. So the blurb is, for generations, our remote ancestors have been cast as primitive and childlike, either free and equal or thuggish and warlike. Civilization, we are told, could be achieved only by sacrificing those original freedoms, or alternatively by taming our baser instincts. David I don't know how to say that, but David and David show how such theories first emerged in the 18th century as a reaction to indigenous critiques of European society. Oh, okay, I understand, right. So the colonial mindset is we observe indigenous people, and the more industrialized nations were saying we count as what is progressed, and they're still in the primitive form. So we need to help them to progress and become like us. Okay, I understand. Rather than it just being an equally valid, different way of being. So they're applying it to history that we as a species were, okay, so I get that now. In doing so, they overturn our view of human history, including the origins of farming, property, cities, democracy, slavery, and civilization itself. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds interesting. I might have to... maybe I'll get an audiobook or something. To be honest, I have not really gotten into the world of audiobooks. but I'll maybe have to do that. Let's continue.
Way of thinking about the history of human development. They extend this into the future. And so just the next obvious step is, again, consistent with the colonial mindset, is spreading beyond Earth and colonizing space. And there are all these vast resources out there that long-termists like Nick Bostrom complain are being wasted every day. You know, stars out there that are burning up their reserves of hydrogen. All that energy is being wasted, quote unquote. It's not going to fuel valuable enterprises like creating or sustaining huge, literally planet-sized computers running virtual reality worlds full of trillions and trillions of people.
Just very quickly, I've just looked in the chat and seen a message which looks interesting. So Key Legacy or Kai Legacy has said, welcome to the chat first of all, has said, I'm a Christian, 20 years. I don't know if that means you've been a Christian for 20 years or you're 20 years old, but they say, I've been studying antinatalism for a while now. I'm thinking about getting a vasectomy. I haven't yet... I have yet to find a counter argument good enough to convince me to have kids in this world. That's super interesting that you're a Christian. So there is, if you're on Facebook, there is a Facebook group of Christian antinatalists, which you might be interested in joining, because I guess you'll find people that you can relate to even more than other antinatalists. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, if you end up getting a vasectomy, I hope it goes well and everything. I had one, I don't know how long ago it was now, like a few years ago. And it was a great decision. But I mean, I don't think we should set a standard in the antinatalist community that like getting sterilized is an expectation, or like you're not a proper antinatalist. Not that I'm saying you were saying this, obviously. I'm just saying in general, that, yeah, you should be expected to get one, or you're not a proper antinatalist, or you're not properly committed if you don't get sterilized. It's a personal medical decision. It should be accepted, obviously, and celebrated if someone gets one. But well, celebrated sounds a bit culty, but like if people want to, they can sort of celebrate it. But yeah, like, yeah, I don't think it should become like some sort of toxic pressure-y thing in the community that like people feel like they have to, even when they're a bit reluctant to. And Louis says, I had my vasectomy about 20 years ago. What a lad. Higher Entropy is also in the chat. Welcome, Higher Entropy. I just pressed space to play and I wasn't even on the thing.
It's interesting because that fits one of the theorists of ecological overshoot, William Catton, who is a sociologist who talks about takeover, which was the colonial process of mainly Europeans taking over land, taking over people, taking over the materials, and then drawdown, taking down the minerals, the stuff under the crust, in our case, fossil fuels, but on Mars, the colonial takeover of planets and then draw them down, suck the energy and materials out of them. It's an interesting analogy.
So I would say that EAs and long-termists in general have pretty habitually underestimated the significance of environmental destruction. You know, they don't really see it as an existential risk. Like maybe it's going to contribute to existential risk, and that's why we should be concerned about it. And I think part of it is that their view, like in practice, is pretty anthropocentric. And they would say our ethics, because, you know, utilitarianism, it's not anthropocentric, it's what they would call sentiocentric. So it centers any kind of sentient entities. Right. The thing is that humans are, as it were, more sentient than other beings. And so we end up mattering more than other creatures. And so sort of fitting together with this in a certain way, you find Will MacAskill writing in his 2022 book, What We Owe the Future, that our destruction of the environment.
Yeah, I guess because I was about to disagree with Emil there, but to be fair, I'm overexposed to vegan effective altruists because there's sort of like an animal subset of effective altruism that does focus on animals, and I'm sort of more in contact with that. But yeah, actually, like if you zoom out, I mean, I would say like actually, to be honest, I can't speak with any authority on this, so yeah, I don't know. But I would I'd be comfortable saying that the interests of other animals are more in the minds of effective altruists than they are of the average person. And there's probably a higher proportion of vegans in the EA space than there is compared to the background population. Because to be fair to effective altruists, if you go on their websites and look at their recommended charities, there are animal charities included, and the interests of other animals are included in like their discourse and stuff. I don't know fully to the extent, but they are included, whereas non-human animals are not included in any meaningful way, really, in the wider discourses in society. So, yeah, I don't know if Emil's been a bit unfair, but yeah, I can also understand that like the long-termist view seems to be very anthropocentric. Yeah, definitely. From the long-termist discussions I've been aware of and seen, they're definitely like very anthropocentric.
And might actually be net positive. And the reason is that because we care about sentience, and therefore we care about the experience of suffering, not just in humans, but in other creatures, because there is a lot of suffering in the wild, among wild animals, this is debatable, but this is a premise to the claim, the fewer wild animals there are, the less wild animals suffer.
So I'm going to have to go back because they've kind of switched onto wild animals now rather than long-termism. So I kind of missed that switch.
Sentient entities, right? The thing is that humans are, as it were, more sentient than other beings. And so we end up mattering more than other creatures. And so sort of fitting together with this in a certain way, you find Will MacAskill writing in his 2022 book, What We Owe the Future, that our destruction of the environment might actually be net positive. And
that's interesting. I do not remember him talking about that, but it was a while ago I read the book. Yeah, I don't remember him talking about that because this is something that a lot of pro-natalist vegans talk about. They sort of use it as an example, use it as a case against antinatalism. Yeah, so that's interesting. I don't remember Will MacAskill talking about that.
The reason is that because we care about sentience, and therefore we care about the experience of suffering, not just in humans, but in other creatures, because there is a lot of suffering in the wild, among wild animals, this is debatable, but this is a premise to the claim, the fewer wild animals there are, the less wild animals suffer.
Gosh.
Wow.
So consequently, by going out and obliterating ecosystems, raising forests, polluting the oceans, and so on, all that sounds bad, but that just means there are fewer wild animals to suffer. And obviously the limit of that is, well...
So there's a slightly more nuanced case that I've heard that Emil isn't putting forward there. So I think what he's saying there, and I can't remember what Will MacAskill says in the book, so I'm not speaking about Will MacAskill, I'm speaking generally now. So what Emil is saying is that there's a case being made that we should destroy more of the environment because even though that will be essentially like slaughtering and displacing wild animals in the short run, in the long term it'll be better because there will be less area and presumably then less wild animals to bring more wild animals into existence and have on average very bad lives. So that's what Emil's talking about. So the more like reasonable and like frankly more common view that is similar to this that I've heard that he's kind of not mentioned, they have not mentioned here, is that is saying so wild animals matter and it's better if they didn't come into existence. And we have already done a lot of destruction and cleared a lot of land. And there's not necessarily an advocation for further destruction, but it's a recognition that now that that destruction has been done, the destruction that has been done, we should not be going about trying to return that land. Okay, now, sorry. Yeah, we should not be going about we should not be trying to return that land to nature because then that will allow wild animal populations to expand again, or it will sort of help facilitate that. That's the more sort of like nuanced and I think less like aggressive take that I've heard be made. I'm not making any judgments on either of the views here, but I'm saying like there's a position that Emil is sort of not airing there, which is slightly less sort of out there.
In the future, maybe the best thing to do is just get rid of the biosphere altogether. Maybe we all become digital beings. Maybe there are no animals. Maybe we simulate animals in the virtual reality that we all live in. But that's one issue that's kind of shocking and irrelevant to what you were saying, I think.
Well, you had a great example in one of your essays. You quote McGaskill from What We Owe the Future, where he mentions that even 15 degrees of warming, the heat would not pass lethal limits for crops in most regions. And then you consulted several experts, agricultural and climate change. You said that's just pure nonsense. 15 degrees Celsius? Is that really?
Celsius.
Just
to be clear, Celsius.
Oh my God.
So that leapt off the page.
Yeah, that seems wild. 15 degrees increase everywhere. Well, I mean, I could kind of understand that because obviously it would make the equator and then much of the sort of tropics and the areas around that, presumably you wouldn't be able to grow any crops. But a lot of the like landmass of Russia would then be unlocked. So, and then presumably like maybe even some of Antarctica. I mean, you'd obviously soil would have to be generated there and stuff, but I mean, this is kind of tangential, but yeah, I wouldn't, to be honest, I don't know if I'd be surprised either way. Because a 15 degrees rise, like that probably would make a lot of Russia, a lot of like Siberia, and Canada and Alaska, like more able to grow crops. What's it called? Arable. So, yeah, I don't know either way, but like, whatever.
And smacked me in the face when I read it, because that is absolutely wild. I mean, again, the most recent studies say with just the warming that's expected this century, 2 degrees, 3, maybe 4 billion people will die, 2 billion will be displaced. Maybe those two numbers will overlap, and a lot of people displaced will die. But I mean, that is just unfathomable. And I spoke to a climate expert yesterday who's a friend of mine, and he was pointing out that even if there were just like, if there was an event, maybe a climate-related event, or maybe an event resulting from some of these AI systems that killed 2 million people in a relatively short time, like would civilization survive? Like just really reflect on like the mayhem, the shock, the psychocultural trauma of something like that. I mean, that would just be extraordinary. And again, that's a small number compared to the 1 billion who are expected to perish by the end of the century. So
you've talked about how there is kind of a religious type of strength to it and belief system in terms of the ideology of both effective altruism and long-termism, and that they emerged basically out of the hole that religion left. And they were trying to fill that same hole with this kind of godlike, messianic, techno-utopian, grandiose vision of a world, and that they are the gods that will bring us all there. Well, not us, but the future trillions of disembodied people living on servers. As you said, where there's no life, there's no suffering, and, you know, kind of a very anti-life, antinatalist type of a view of the universe. I just wanted to make that comment of just how many parallels one can draw between this kind of completely ecologically blind human supremacist ideology and many of the religions that also seem to share that ecological blindness and human supremacist worldview.
So yeah, you're exactly right. I think that one way of understanding the development of EA and long-termism is with respect to the transhumanist movement, which predates EA and long-termism. So EA sort of, in a sense, its roots go back to two different phenomena. One is the transhumanism. So Toby Ord, for example, was co-authoring papers with Bostrom back in 2006, several years before EA was created, that were defending the transhumanist worldview. And the other strand of EA goes back to Peter Singer's work. And I think a lot of Singer's work is really quite problematic. I mean, he's a utilitarian who takes his utilitarian ethics very seriously and follows the premises of utilitarianism to their logical ends, which leads him to say things like, if there are babies, infants, with certain kinds of disabilities, then the morally right thing to do might be to kill them. So anyway, so those are the two strands. And with respect to transhumanism, the reason I mentioned that is that this was an ideology developed in the early 20th century, explicitly as a replacement for traditional religion. Christianity was absolutely dominant within the West from roughly the 4th or 5th centuries of the Common Era. So a few centuries after Jesus lived and died. That's when it became really widespread in the Roman Empire. And then it just dominated all the way up until the 19th century. That's when it started to decline. It was that century that Karl Marx denigrated religion as the opium of the masses. Friedrich Nietzsche famously said, God is dead. Why is he dead? Because we have killed him, through science, and basically branches of theology, started looking into the historical reliability of the Bible and so on. And the results weren't very good.
Right.
So anyways, Christianity declined, and it is extraordinary. If you read the literature at the time, this is around the time that the term agnostic was coined as well. So there are a lot of agnostics and atheists.
It's quite interesting on this topic. There have been some people that have come to antinatalism after losing their religion. So in the most recent episode of Antinatalism Around the World, I interview Mani in Iran, and he spoke about how he came to antinatalism after he was raised Muslim and then sort of relinquished, is relinquished the right word? Threw off Islam. And then was looking for, some other sort of way to find understanding in the world and stuff. Came across pessimistic literature and then came across antinatalism. So that's quite interesting that, there are, there is something to the fact that I don't think it's necessarily just religion. It's just people need a set of ideas to feel belonging to, I guess. Or not even necessarily a set of ideas. People just need to find belonging. And often that will be based in a community that is based around a set of ideas. Obviously, you could find belonging in just a small family unit, and you don't really need any sort of like grand narrative or ideas around you, right? If you're fulfilled in the small family unit that you have. But often people will also be part of like wider communities, and I guess those are usually based around ideas. So it's not necessarily just religion, it's just religion's played that role, and now people are trying to find other things to play that role. And maybe they don't work as well, maybe they do work as well, or blah, 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 blah. But yeah, there's definitely something to this whole thing of like people are searching for ways to find community or meaning. And one of the ways that people find, one of the ways is antinatalism or pessimism. And one of the ways is like this EA stuff and long-termism. Cool. Bravis has joined the chat. Welcome, Bravis. Chloe as well. Sorry if there's anyone else new who I have missed. Just remember, if you haven't already, please like the stream. It will help promote it. And I think that's everything. Let's continue.
Who were just reeling from the loss of religion, like all of the meaning and purpose and the eschatological hope. So hope for the future of humanity, that traditional religion that Christianity provided, all that was gone. So the atheists were wondering, like, what is the point of any of this? How do we live our lives? Like, what is the purpose? Darwinianism says that we emerge just by happenstance through contingent evolution. And then physics tells us that the universe will become uninhabitable in the future. So why?
Right.
Why are we here? And anyway, so I mentioned that because it was right around that time that you get a bunch of ideologies that offer basically the same promises that Christianity did, but are secular in nature. So this is when Marxism emerged. And there's the promise of a kind of utopian future once we get this worldwide communist state. And yeah, the parallels between Marxism and Christian eschatology, their narrative of the end of the world, are very striking. Also, then transhumanism emerged. And the first book that really developed the transhumanist idea, although it didn't use that term, I believe the term was evolutionary humanism, was by Julian Huxley, and it was revealing the title Religion Without Revelation. So it was like, this transhumanism, here's a new religion, you don't need faith. Actually, what we need is just to rely on science and technology. And so, transhumanism basically offers the possibility of heaven on earth by using science and technology to re-engineer humanity. So there's the promise of immortality, the abolition of, or at least the significant reduction of suffering in the world. And, if you fast forward to the rise of modern transhumanism, as opposed to this early transhumanism from the earlier 20th century. So,
welcome to the chat, Saint Pat as well. Yeah, I don't think there's anyone else new.
Modern transhumanism really emerged in the 1980s, 1990s. So right around that time, you also get the promise of resurrection. So the first people to articulate the modern transhumanist ideology were involved in cryonics. So if you don't live long enough to live forever, as Ray Kurzweil says, if you don't live long enough to get access to these technologies, then you can always just have your body cryogenically frozen.
That's very interesting. I guess, like, I assume a lot of transhumanists would push back at the idea that it's a religion, and I guess I would say it's unfair to characterize it as a religion in the way of like, it doesn't make the same sort of like claims about the universe in terms of like supernatural stuff. But it's quite interesting that, yeah, Emil is sort of framing it as a replacement to religion, and it carries a lot of the same symbolism.
So it can be resurrected at some point, maybe 21 to 50 or whenever we have the technologies available. So I think it's a very facile way of, knocking an ideology is to describe it as a religion, right? Lots of people do that. Wokeism is religion, conservatism is religion, so on and so on. But in this case, transhumanism, it really is like very much a religion. And that really is the foundation, I think, of EA and definitely long-termism, which basically just subsumes transhumanism within it, which is another way to say that long-termism builds on transhumanism.
Right. Well, the one thought I keep having is it doesn't take very much to understand how perverse and just how self-aggrandizing the movement is. And yet I'm part of the animal rights movement, really sophisticated-minded people who have really caught on to the EA philosophy. In fact, a lot of animal charities are based on EA principles. And McCaskill has become a real hero in a lot of these movements. In fact, you might even know that this data analysis site, Our World in Data, that gets, upwards of 80 million people each month in terms of website visits, they're very much influenced by the effective altruism movement.
Yeah, I mean, I use that website.
They get a ton of funding from EA, from the Gates Foundation, from the Musk Foundation, and yet they are seen as the go-to data analysis and interpretation site. And of course, they're getting their data from reliable sources, but it's the interpretation of the data that really reveals their biases. And they have the same kind of techno-fundamentalist world.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Our World in Data has a page on long-termism.
Worldview that things are getting better and better and better, and we just need more technology to help us get out of these catastrophic predictions. And how is it that so many people have fallen into this trap? What is so attractive about it? Is it the godlike qualities, at the promise of a utopian future that so many young and intelligent, sophisticated, educated people are buying into this?
That may be part of it. I mean, on the one hand, this kind of techno-solutionist approach has an obvious appeal to people in the tech world. It tells them that they're the answer to all the world's problems. But also, I mean, tying this back to this idea of transhumanism and long-termism as a sort of religious worldview. Another parallel that I didn't mention was that many people in the community see AGI or superintelligence, a version of AGI that is not just...
We have a super chat. So first of all, thank you so much for the support, Nadia. Absolute legend. It is going to pop up at some point on screen and it will catch me off guard. So thank you so much for the support. And Nadia says, I hate long-termist freakazoids, but these lunatics miss the easy... And here we go.
We raised them
to be warriors against evil. But these lunatics missed the easy criticism and condemnation of it and drove right into a Christo-fascist... what is 61R7HR4P157 ditch? I don't know what that is. No, I've never heard of that. But yeah, Nadia, if you could, elaborate on what that 61 thing means. Don't worry about sending another super chat unless you'd like to. It's mangling. Okay. Oh, okay. I understand. Oh, okay. I see that. Yeah. Okay, cool. I didn't realize it was, I think they call it leet speak, don't they? Yeah, but thank you for the support, Nadia, and your message as well. Cool. Let's actually very quickly before we continue, I'm gonna quickly get a snack because I don't know if it's the hot weather or something, but like during streams I've been getting hungry recently, so I'm gonna be right back in less than 30 seconds. And we're back. Okay. Cool. All right. Let's continue.
Human equivalent in its capabilities, but far superior than us. They see superintelligence as, to borrow their term, godlike AI. And so one way of like reconstructing this is if God doesn't exist, why not just create him? Alternatively, why not become him? So the reason I mentioned that is once you have God, then if God loves not his children, but his parents, again, using he, because most people in this community are men.
Right. We noticed that.
Yes. Yeah. It's overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male, which definitely ties into one of my other critiques of this community. But, you know, if we create this God that loves us, then it will do whatever we tell it to do. And also a crucial idea here is that on the sort of long-termist EA transhumanist view, pretty much every problem in the world is understood as an engineering problem. And so, you know, what makes a good engineer? Well, they would say intelligence. A more intelligent person is going to be better at engineering than a less intelligent person. I think this notion of intelligence is deeply problematic, but I'm just going to go with their premises here.
If anyone is wondering, it's the classic vegan snack of hummus and crackers.
So consequently, if you have a superintelligence, then it will be capable of super engineering feats. And since everything is an engineering problem, including climate change, wars, social upheaval, social religious conflicts around the world, and so on, once you have superintelligence, then you can just task it with solving all these problems, and it will do that. Maybe it'll take 5 or 10 seconds to like think and go, okay, I have a solution to climate change. As if we like don't know how to solve climate change now. It's really just a political will problem and a coordination problem. So yeah, I think this techno solution, it's appealing to tech billionaires for this reason. I think there's also this widespread notion that, which ties into this linear view of human development. And it's sort of techno-deterministic, to use a sort of technical term, this notion that there are no brakes on the technological enterprise.
I shouldn't have stopped then because I hadn't finished eating. We have another super chat. First of all, thank you so much for the support. Yeah, it really helps with the, I know I say this every time, but it really helps with like the ongoing subscriptions and everything for the channel. So the Antinatalope has said, the Antinatalope is my favorite commentator. Haha, made you say it. You know what? I should have read the whole thing before I started reading. Now someone can clip that and
children in this world, and
we raise them to be warriors against evil. So thank you so much, Antinotelope, for the super chat. And then we've actually just had a donation as well through Streamlabs, which just came up. So I think the super chat will now come up in a minute. But
we bring children
here it is.
Into this world, and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
But the previous donation just says, enjoy your snack. Thank you so much for the support, and I will enjoy the snack. I hope you enjoy any snack that you are also indulging in while watching the stream. Cool. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much both for the support, and let's continue.
There's only one way forward. So if you were to believe that, okay, technology got us into this mess, or at least enabled us to get into this mess, but more technology is going to help us get out of it. That fits very nicely with this view that, well, we can't stop technology anyways.
Yeah.
As opposed to if you hold the opposite view, like my view, which I think building more and more technology is probably just going to make things worse. It complicates our threat environment even more, make it even more unmanageable and untractable, and so on, and that this is basically a dead-end road.
Yeah, we've had many guests on talking about more ecological knowledge, whether indigenous or Western science, and having more of an ignorance-based worldview as we learn the complexity of how plants talk to each other with fungi, the animal behavior, the things that we're learning because we've really only had ecological science, Western ecological science, for maybe 100 years. So this technological, rationalistic, technocratic engineering mind, meanwhile, just blunderbusses forward, creating a trail of problems in its path. And they still have this enormous kind of arrogance and hubris that isn't grounded in an ecological humility. There's very little humility. And it reminded me of Mark Andreessen's Techno-Optimist Manifesto, where he's...
Oh, no, I was going to say Snake Killer's joined the chat, but actually, I think Snake Killer, you were here like right at the start, right?
saying things like, techno-optimists believe societies like sharks grow or die. We believe everything good is downstream of growth. It's all about growth and technology and moving forward and not dying. Anything else is stagnation. And so, and very linear that way too, progress, right? Onward and upward. There's no life cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. There is sort of a great irony in the long-termist literature, something I was very aware of when I was part of the community and contributing to this literature, which is that there is a widespread acknowledgement that technology is overwhelmingly responsible for our unprecedented predicament these days with respect to the risks that we're facing, global scale risks. But the idea is that more technology. So this much technology is bad. It gets us into all sorts of problems, but a bit more.
Thing is, whilst more technology could lead to like higher stakes, like I agree with that. You know, the more technology we have, the larger we grow our capacities, then I mean, you know, the more good we may be able to do, but also the more harm we can do, depending on the technology. And where the fuck was I going to go with that? Now I've completely forgot where I was going to go with that.
Technology is going to save us. In fact, this also ties into this idea of everything being an engineering problem. So one way that a lot of long-termists couch or frame our current situation is that we have all of this technological power without sufficient technological wisdom. You know, we're just not wise enough as a species to wield this technology in a safe way. So we realize all the great, wonderful utopian benefits while neutralizing all the risks. Okay, so if that's a problem, and if all problems are engineering problems, then that's an engineering problem. So how do we solve this problem of a mismatch between wisdom and our technology? Well, we just re-engineer humanity.
Yeah.
So, you know, one of the main solutions put forward to this problem is that we should try to develop human enhancement technologies, particularly cognitive enhancement technologies, so that we can radically enhance our capacity for wisdom and thereby putting us in a position to responsibly use these technologies. So Eliezer Yudkowsky would be one of many, many examples where he's very worried about AGI being developed in the near future and that causing our extinction. He's literally said in podcast interviews that if we were a sane society, as he puts it, we would ban all work on AGI right now, take a lot of those resources and reallocate them towards developing these technologies to create a new cognitively, intellectually superior post-human species. This also ties into capitalism. Again, you have...
That's so strange. Why would you not just put the resources into, like, reducing the very obvious suffering that's going on now? Like, I would, if we were talking about new technologies, I would pump that money into getting, like, lab-grown meat to market or something like that. You know, that would, in terms of technologies that could really massively improve the state of the world as it is now, in my eyes, that would be one of them. It's very bizarre. People have, I think, so it's obviously good to be forward thinking in some ways, but there are some people that seem to just be way too forward thinking in terms of like humans have not even like put their clothes on, and yet someone is trying to like run down the street while you're still naked or something like that. Do you get what I mean?
These utopian ideologies and then this capitalist ideology. And one way of understanding transhumanism is not just as a utopian possibility, not just as a solution to the problems that we now confront as a result of technology, but also as a means for capitalism to continue its growthist march. Because, right, we're pushing up against all these limits of resources. Well, there's another resource that hasn't really been tapped, and that's the human organism. So, like, if you want to keep the engines of economic growth and productivity roaring, one way is to ensure that the individuals who are part of that engine, part of that system, that they are more productive. And so by re-engineering humanity, maybe you could create organisms that are even better little capitalist agents. They're even more productive, they're even more efficient, they're better at optimizing tasks and, and so on. And Will MacAskill references this in his book, What We Owe the Future, that global depopulation is something he's very worried about. Same with Elon Musk and the others. So global population decline. This is a big concern because it could result in economic stagnation. Well, what could we do then? Well, we could just re-engineer humanity. We just create designer babies, ensure that they are all as quote unquote intelligent as Einstein. Or he says if that doesn't work, then we just create new AGI, artificial general intelligences at the human level to replace workers in the economic system. So I hope all of this ties in. Like transhumanism, re-engineering humanity is one way to solve the problem of global catastrophic risk that technology itself is responsible for overwhelmingly. But it's also, transhumanism can be understood as just an extension of techno-capitalism. This is an argument that a friend of mine, Alexander Thomas, makes in a forthcoming book, which is really compelling. So, we're just another, Heidegger would say, standing reserve. Reserves to be exploited in order to keep this juggernaut of capitalism moving forward.
So a couple of things that have, emerged for me is people are now really starting to buy into this depopulation panic as a result of fertility rates declining because of greater gender equality and, women finally having.
Yeah, because Emil mentioned this, it actually reminded me of, let me drag this over. This book, Decline and Prosper, I still have not, read this, but I was just actually checking out if it maybe has an audiobook version. But I can't. Yeah, I'll have to check later. This would be interesting to go on. So basically, for anyone that doesn't know, this book is basically about, you can kind of get it from the title. There's all this like panic, both moral and also like economic panic around declining birth rates around the world. And this person basically presumably makes the case that actually we could use it as an opportunity and make our lives better, make our economies better, which is interesting. I'm wary of the fact that obviously I want that to be true. So it's kind of like I'm seeking out information to confirm my biases. But I've heard so much information and so much stuff from the opposite side of how it's going to make things worse, which I kind of like just tacitly accept. But I want to see the other side, even though I know I'll be prone to like agreeing with it, but I want to see that side because I almost tacitly accept that there will be a great disadvantage. Not that makes it okay to procreate, but yeah, I want to now see like the other side, see if am I conceding too much to the sort of naysayers?
The autonomy to decide for themselves whether or not they want children, and if so, how many. And we see reproductive rights and environmental rights completely intertwined, right? When reproductive rights are under attack through patriarchal oppression, it's the same patriarchal oppression that is extended toward the earth, in the form of, as you've said, neocolonialism and capitalism and extractivism of the planet. For the longest time, we were just concerned about the patriarchal, conservative control of reproduction in order to create either bigger empires, bigger states, bigger capital, more conservative tribes. And we thought with feminism and with liberal values, we can push against these, and that's what we need to do. And now we've got this new branch of people emerging who apparently call themselves the secularists or liberals, right? Who are now also feeding into the same depopulation panic that a lot of nationalists and conservatives are feeding into. So in both cases, whether it's the far right or the long-termists, they're both looking at women's reproduction as vessels through which these ghastly futures will be realized. And that's really scary. You know, they're both extremely pronatalist groups.
It is really interesting to see this sort of alignment of these different groups. It's fascinating and also a bit alarming. I think one is that with respect to the more sort of political right groups that are anxious about depopulation, a lot of worry about the great replacement. Also, you know, I think a lot of long-termists would say that part of the reason population decline is so unfortunate is that there is a positive correlation between population size and innovation. And since climate change, environmental destruction is an engineering problem, ultimately, if you have less innovation, then you're less likely to stumble upon or to create a solution to these problems of environmental degradation. So consequently, the claim then is that if you want to solve the climate crisis, etc., you should actually want there to be a larger population, because that means more innovation. More innovation means greater chance of actually solving it.
The tenets of free market fundamentalism.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of that sort of fundamentalism, I think, in this.
I've just seen a chat. Anna says, have you read or heard of The Divide by Jason Hickel? It's about degrowth, which I think could be an economic proposal for an antinatalist world. Still reading it, though. I think I might have heard of it, but let me look it up. So, The Divide by Jason Hickel. A brief guide to Jason. So it came out in 2017. No, I've never come across it. Yeah, I've got it open in a tab now, so I'll have a look into it later. Thanks for mentioning it.
Crowd. Libertarianism is very influential. Has been from the origins of modern transhumanism in the 1980s, 1990s, the first organized transhumanist movement being the extropian movement. And they were explicitly libertarian. Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged was on their official reading list and so on. And I think that libertarian tradition extends through EA to long-termism today, which is not to say that every long-termist is a libertarian, but many are. So ultimately, even if there are different reasons for being concerned about population decline, there is this fascinating kind of alignment of different groups, ultimately ending up.
I actually haven't, my experience hasn't been that long-termists are, actually, I don't know if he said long-termists or transhumanists, but I guess it would apply either way. My experience hasn't been that they are, a lot of them are libertarians. I've actually heard quite a lot of them advocate for state intervention because they would want, for example, I'm pretty sure like in Wales, which is part of the UK, there's a minister for the long-term future, or future generations, or I don't know what it's called, which like I've heard long-termists and transhumanists both advocate for like that sort of thing in government, like a transhumanist department or like a future people's department, which is not necessarily, like, that's not a very libertarian thing to advocate for. So yeah, I'm not sure about that, of what Emil says, but yeah, anyway.
Up at the same general conclusion that we should be really worried about population decline, and at exactly the moment when you have climate scientists, many of whom are starting to scream that we have too many people and we need to reel in these sort of growthist tendencies that are at the root of our socioeconomic system.
Yeah, they're concerned with technological innovation. Just in terms of an effective altruist, you'd think they would care enough about the education of the billions that could be educated so much better in this world to further innovation. So there are so many children getting virtually no education that if you just poured your effective altruism into those children, truly poured it into them in a significant way, you wouldn't be playing a numbers game with technical innovation. So it's interesting the disconnect they had there, just counting up humans, and yet they also as EA or long-termist, presumably care about the utility of all the humans on the planet, but here are these humans existing now who could be much more improved through education and help their technological progress that they're so worried about.
On the EA account, and I think this largely goes for transhumanism and long-termism as well, you could really see ethics as a branch of economics, right? It really is just about crunching the numbers and so on. And the fact that there's such a focus on number crunching means that there's a very strong quantitative bias. Consequently, when you consider interventions like improving education in certain parts of the world that are impoverished, it becomes really difficult to put numbers on the outcome of those interventions. Consequently, those interventions get sort of deprioritized, or they just don't fit in the quantitative metric framework that EA embraces. And yeah, so then ultimately you might, as an EA, conclude that maybe focusing on education is not the best way to go because there's a lot of uncertainty.
Well, it's interesting with the Gates malarial bed nets example, right? Where the unintended consequences of a lot of those people using those nets to overfish was at Lake Chad. And they were using the nets for other things, right? Because they thought, wow, this is a great net. Now I don't have to sew a net together to find fish. You kind of maximize these certain metrics, and then you're blind to all these unintended consequences.
Yeah, I think it's a problem with a simplistic kind of one-size-fits-all approach. And this has definitely been a criticism of Western philanthropy, global North-based philanthropy, is that people do come in with this notion that, oh, if this program worked in region A of some part of the world, then it's going to work in regions B through Z. And so this is one argument for actually why this whole kind of top-down approach to philanthropy is not good. And maybe the best thing that you could do is to fund grassroots organizations that have ground-level understanding of the particulars of their predicament and why individuals are trapped in the cycle of poverty. And also just another thing to add, because it's shocking but relevant here, is that this numbers game is precisely what leads one of the founders.
So they've kind of gone off antinatalism or like population related stuff, but we'll keep going, but because there's only like sort of 10 minutes left.
Of long-termism, Nick Beckstead, to argue in his PhD dissertation, which is widely regarded as one of the founding documents of the long-termist ideology, he argues that if you are in a situation where you have to choose between saving a life of somebody in a rich country versus saving a life of somebody in a poor country, you should definitely save the life of the person in the rich country. Because from a long-termist perspective, lives lived in rich countries are much more valuable. Rich countries are more economically productive. Ultimately, they're just better positioned to influence the very far future than lives in a poor country. So to tie this into what you were saying, is like, if you are an EA long-termist, and consequently what you care about the most is that things go well in the very long run future, which means not just ensuring that people in the...
Yeah, I feel like this is an example where people start to miss the forest for the trees. Like I was talking about, you know, if you focus so much on these like grand narrative, I guess long-termism isn't end state orientated because there's not a specific end state they're looking for, but it is like a grand narrative type type ideology. It can make you just completely overlook the interests and like needs of people in the here and now. And I guess that's like an example of it, right?
Future have a decent life, but that they exist in the first place. Because again, could exist implies should exist, assuming that they have a half-decent life. Then taking your finite resources and spending them on programs that would improve the education of people in impoverished regions of the world, maybe that's just not the best way to go about things. Again, a life saved in a rich country should be prioritized over a life saved in a poor country. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, and of course, a reflection of an extreme version is the Collinses, and they've taken it into their own hands to repopulate.
So the Collinses, if people don't know, so they're a pro-natalist couple from America, and they've done quite a few videos on antinatalism on their channel Based Camp. I have also had a debate with them, along with John. They were in London, so we went to their hotel and we had a discussion/debate there. And that is on my channel, so you can check that out. If you type in like Lawrence Anton and like Collinses, or just go on my debate playlist, then it's you should find it.
populate the world with their own genetic material, given that it is the most superior and rich and intelligent and all that, they've kind of talked about as long as each of their descendants can commit to having at least 8 or 10 children for just 11 generations, their bloodline will eventually outnumber the current human population. So again, I'm so shocked that so many news outlets have given them a platform to share their idea. And Elon Musk has retweeted what a great thing they are doing in terms of service to humanity. And it feeds very much into again, what we were talking about earlier, the conservative depopulation panic of the great replacement fear of being overtaken by the wrong kind, the wrong color, the wrong religion of people, and basically taking matters into your own hand. And instead of educating people, raising people out of poverty, and really just proliferating more rights-based, justice-based values, they're saying, well, no, we know how to create the right kind of people and we're going to do it.
Talk about hubris.
Yes.
More of me is what's going to save the world.
Yes.
And it's so hubristic. I mean, you mentioned Elon Musk. He's, as I understand it, has supported the Collins.
Yes.
But of course, he has a bunch of children and sees himself as playing a role in this. But the Collins also, their organization, pronatalist.org, has received, if I remember correctly, hundreds of thousands of dollars from leading figures within the long-termist EA transhumanist community, like Jan Talent. So Jan
I didn't realize that.
Talent is a co-founder of Skype, a multi-millionaire. I believe he has just under $1 billion, so almost a billionaire. But he's been a major funder of the AGI. So it's a very bizarre moment when we need more people. We need more of a certain type of people. And I mean, the Collins have this very strange, like extreme, what scientists would call hereditarian view. That, a lot of our traits as individuals are based in our genes. I mean, there's a trivial sense in which that's true. Knocking out a single gene might have all sorts of consequences, but the claim is stronger than that. It's that, there are particular traits that are determined by our genes. And the Collins, I remember reading an interview with them where they were saying that they believe that even ideology is genetically based, at least to a significant degree. And so, if you see that there are a bunch of Nazis in the world who are reproducing, well, that's bad because their children have a good chance of being Nazis for genetic reasons.
Yeah. Right.
Not just cultural reasons, but genetic reasons. So that is just a really extreme view. I mean, I lived in Germany for 3 years recently, and there are lots of people my age whose grandparents were Nazis.
Right.
They are not Nazis.
Yeah.
This is not genetically determined. But even traits like intelligence, is that genetically determined? I don't know. Intelligence is such a complex phenomena. There's so many different types of intelligence. There are so many genes interacting in complex ways that it's just deeply problematic to say, oh, well, I scored high on this very impoverished, narrow, one-dimensional test called the IQ test, which, measures intelligence in some meaningful way, which I strongly disagree with. But I scored high on it, so I should have more children because they're going to be high IQ. And the higher the average IQ of our society, the better the society is going to become. It's all just deeply problematic from a scientific perspective to this higher level kind of sociological point of view. So all of it's just really bizarre. We're in such a bizarre moment.
How do you see after Sam Bankman-Fried and the humiliation of that and the exit of him and his billions, where is EA movement and long-termism now, do you think?
Great question. Beginning in the summer of 2022, when McCaskill published his book on long-termism, there was a big push to evangelize for this ideology among...
Yeah, I can remember that. That was around the time I think I bought the book, basically when it came out.
The public. And I think for several months, it was, in general, very successful. So McCaskill, the effective altruist movement, and this spin-off ideology of long-termism was getting coverage on the front page of Time magazine, New York Times, The Guardian was running articles on it. McCaskill himself made an appearance on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. Trevor Noah seemed to be very enamored with McCaskill's long-termist views. So I think this sort of outreach effort was very successful. And then at exactly the worst moment for this whole project of trying to convert people, members of the general public, to the long-termist ideology, FTX collapsed. And I think that sort of undid all of the progress that McCaskill and other EA long-termists had made. And perhaps in a way that was irreversible, it sort of tarnished the image of EA and long-termism. So all of that is to say that I think EA now is tightly linked with Bankman-Fried, and arguably the worst case of fraud in US history. Same with long-termism. And consequently, I think the general public has lost interest for the most part in EA. And I know there were a lot of people who initially found EA and long-termism very compelling and appealing, who now kind of want nothing to do with it. That being said, EA still remains a really powerful, influential force within the political arena, and especially, I think, within the tech world. So there are a lot of powerful people, like a lot of individuals, like AI researchers at companies like Anthropic, which is mostly just an EA organization, who still very much subscribe to the EA worldview. And before FTX collapsed, the EA community had $46.1 billion in committed funding just for like its own projects. So when FTX collapsed, a good chunk of that money was lost, but there still remained billions and billions of dollars. I mean, this was made explicit by leaders of the EA community to community members, that there still is just lots and lots of money for research projects and so on.
So with a little bit of time left, we wanted to ask you about the essay that you wrote in Medium last year titled Why I Won't Have Children.
Here we go. Now we're back on topic. Let's go.
Could you share with us some of the reasoning behind that decision?
The way that I sort of couched that article is, when I was young, I had this assumption that the world was in general a good place. And then there was somebody who told me about starvation around the world and certain diseases like brain tumors that young children, basically my age at the time, would get. And that was an occasion for me to reflect on the possibility that actually maybe the world is a bit more menacing than I had thought. And so the article is basically just could be seen as a progress report on my thinking about this issue. And for decades, I maintained this belief that in general, the world is a good place. But by the time I got to my early 40s, I'm 41 now, having, seen a bunch of close friends of mine die young, some as a result of suicide, and then just taking a broader view of the situation of humanity in the 21st century and recognizing the extraordinary, unprecedented perils of climate change and the sixth mass extinction event, the risks associated with the development of emerging technologies. And so all of this is to say that when I pivot from thinking about experiences that I've had myself or vicariously through friends to looking at just the broader situation of humanity this century, it all just looks really bleak. And I don't want that to be the case.
Yeah, so it's not antinatalism, it's more just like a sense of great existential uncertainty, but also the prospect of like your child having a very bad life. So it's not really a rejection of procreation. It's more just overwhelming odds, sort of forcing their decision.
But it's a conclusion that I just can't really resist. And so that is why I have decided not to have children. But also, one thing I emphasize in the article is that I am not at all in any way judgy about people having kids. And I would be mortified if anyone misconstrued the claim otherwise. Like, people have all sorts of different reasons.
Yeah, so they're obviously definitely not antinatalist then.
One thing I mentioned in the article is that there really can be reasons for particular people that aren't necessarily just general universal reasons for everyone. So basically the article was just presenting here are the reasons why I've decided not to have children, because the world is just an obstacle course of hazards and tragedies and booby traps, as it were. But certainly I recognize that there is a diversity of opinions on this matter and feelings, and that questions about having children get at some of the most intimate personal tendencies and beliefs that people might have. So it's not a general prescription for everyone who don't have children. It's more just an explanation. Here's why I'm not going to. I spent the last 10 plus years studying the future of humanity, and it all looks pretty bad.
And yet you do mention, despite the sadness and unfixable brokenness of the world, you still remain pretty involved and optimistic. And you say, I don't believe in hope, but I do believe in duty. How do you interpret that?
So I became acquainted, to my own amazement, with this fascinating and extraordinary author named Amitav Ghosh. So that is his line, which is okay, yeah, maybe I don't have much hope, but I do have a sense of duty. And that just articulated my view in a really wonderful, succinct, and powerful way, which is there's a sense in which the bleaker one assesses the world, the greater one's motivation to be a decent person be a kind, compassionate person. So all the more reason that you should pursue these ends to be good. One response to a sort of bleak assessment of the world is nihilism and defeatism and so on, and just sort of slumping into a corner and saying, well, everything's effed, so what's the point?
I don't think it's necessarily nihilism. I think it would be more like a sort of I don't know if feudalism is even a word, but like basically just feeling like you can't do anything because everything is futile rather than nothing matters.
Of trying. For me, it's the exact opposite. It's like, yeah, the worse things are, the more one should be out in the streets and protesting, being an activist for good climate mitigation policies, and also just in the sphere of one's personal life, to be just a decent human being and to really reflect on how one's actions affect those around them in a good or a bad way. So that's an important part of the article, in addition to me just saying, oh yeah, everything's like actually pretty awful.
And we obviously pick that up because it is probably a close reflection of how we see our role as an organization, of both telling the truth about our ecological predicament and the social and ecological catastrophes that are descending upon us, but at the same time maintaining a certain sense of duty or moral obligation to still do our very best to stay active in the movement and to give people, like you say, not hope so much, but a sense of purpose to minimize suffering that is all around us and that is increasingly going to be occurring with these catastrophes. So we were happy to see that, and we were just delighted to have had the chance to talk to you today. It was a really fascinating conversation.
Cool. And I think that is basically it. So one thing I did want to say before we rounded off is just a little like thing for the future, for tomorrow even, is that obviously tomorrow is Wednesday, which is a video day. I know I don't always post 2 videos a week. Sometimes it goes to 1 video a week. Sometimes it's 0 videos a week. But I try to do 2 videos a week. I'm expecting that in the next couple of months, it'll probably be more like 1 video a week. But the video that is due to come out tomorrow, or will be coming out tomorrow,
children in this world, and we raise them
to be warriors against evil. Okay, we've had another Streamlabs donation come in. So first of all, thank you so much for the support, getting in there right at the last minute. This one says, I confess that I've chosen to watch your live stream instead of trying to make the world a better place. Or maybe the two are not completely separate. Keep up the good work and have fun hanging out with other antinatalist celebrities. Oh, my Lord. So for context, obviously this, they put their name in, so it's fine to say who it is. So Bovine Blue Stocking. So, so that reference that Bovine Blue Stocking is making about antinatalist celebrities is the cosmic antinatalist Tejas, who makes weekly videos. He, was reporting on the panel that's coming up, and he referred to the people on the panel as celebrities. And I was just like, Tejas. But no, it's funny, but I wouldn't use the term celebrity, but it's funny. But yeah, thank you so much, Bovine. And now in a few minutes, I will relinquish you to go and make the world a better place. But thank you so much for the support. So what was I going to say? Yes, so the video coming out tomorrow is going to be a return to the series that I do, which I sort of very occasionally add installments of are they an antinatalist or were they an antinatalist? So I've done quite a few people now: Gandhi, Ricky Gervais, Morrissey, Yuval Noah Harari, Doug Stanhope, probably some others as well that I'm forgetting. And the next installment, we've got another
to be warriors against evil.
We've done a we've done. We've got another bit of support come in. Thank you so much for the support. And they say, really enjoyed your street activism that you uploaded lately. Great work. Well, first of all, I say first of all, I've already said it, but thank you so much for the support. So actually the video on Sunday will be another one of those videos. So, which actually you may have seen, because you get, obviously you guys don't know who this is, but I know who this is. And I know that you get early access. So you may have already watched this one, but on Sunday, the video on Sunday coming out is me having a discussion in person with a guy who goes to Speaker's Corner quite a lot. I've sort of labeled him as like a critical thinker type. He likes to like investigate people's ideas and stuff. So it's me having a conversation with him at Speaker's Corner. But anyway, so the one for tomorrow is a video on, was Tupac an antinatalist? Tupac, the hip hop artist, probably, I think he's generally known as like one of the most famous or influential hip hop artists ever. But yeah, so he said some things in his lyrics and in interviews that kind of suggested that he has like a negative view of procreation. So I've done a video on whether he was an antinatalist or not. And to find out, you'll have to watch the video tomorrow, and see if he was an antinatalist. Cool. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's everything. I just want to say thank you again for everyone who has been here, has been in the chat, and also thank you to everyone who supported with Streamlabs or Super Chats. And yeah, I will see everyone for the video tomorrow, Tupac, and the one on Sunday. And I will see you in the next live stream, whenever that may be. I will catch everyone in the next one.